Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan, and today I'm going to be doing my March wrap-up. So I know we're in April, but last week I tried to make this wrap-up video, and I actually shot a video. But then when I sat down to edit it, I realized that I've missed out about half the books that I read. So I just had to do it all over again, and I just didn't have the energy. So I deleted the video and sat on it for another week. So here I am. Okay, so I'm not, I'm gonna try not to forget any of the books that I read last month. I started March by finishing two very different memoirs. And this is rare because if you've followed my channel, you would have noticed by now that I mostly talk about fiction. And that's because mostly I read fiction, but from time to time I read other books, other kinds of books. So last month I read two memoirs. The first memoir that I finished was The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. This came highly recommended, not by anybody in particular. I guess I had read or listened about this book on different podcasts. I can't remember what made me read it in particular, but I knew from what I've heard and read that it was a queer memoir. And that intrigued me because that's not something I've read a lot of, and it's something that would appeal to me. So I picked it up and I loved it. A lot of what the book dealt with is so familiar to me and so relevant to me and my life and my personal life. A lot of it maybe not right now, but recently. Anyway, without getting too close and personal here, it was a book that spoke to me, and it's a book that I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's so familiar to me, a lot of what the book talks about, and yet it's so rare to find that kind of thing in writing, or at least I hadn't until I read this book. So just to make a little aside, if you know anything like it, or something that you think lovers of The Argonauts would love, just please let me know, because I love to read more stuff like that. And also if you're a Maggie Nelson reader and have something else to recommend by her, I'm open to suggestions. The second memoir that I finished was totally different. It was Michelle Obama's Becoming. And I actually listened to it on audiobook, and I recommend that you do that. Like, if you want to read Becoming by Michelle Obama, if you're one of the 5 people left on this planet who haven't read it yet, I would recommend that you listen to the audiobook because it's narrated by her, and I think that adds a lot to it. It's not a book that I loved. It's not a book that surprised me. I thought it was a very safe book, and that's totally understandable. She's the former First Lady of the United States, and everyone, a lot of people that she talks about are still alive, and so she gives you a glimpse of behind the scenes in the White House, but not really. I mean, she doesn't reveal, she doesn't expose anything, and I didn't expect her to do that. But yeah, so the book is very run-of-the-mill, I think, in many ways, or it's very, like I said, safe, but listening to her own voice, I think, adds that extra bit to it that makes it worthwhile. I think the strongest parts are when she talks about her childhood and her growing up in South Side Chicago. It's a book I recommend if you like politics, or if you like memoirs. But I think listen to the audiobook would be my suggestion. Okay, so the next book I finished last month was The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. And this is a book that had been on my radar for a long time. As an English graduate, I studied Faulkner. I read As I Lay Dying as an undergraduate student. Faulkner is notoriously difficult, and this it's not an easy read. I made a review of this book, so I'm not going to talk too much about it here. So go check it out here on my channel if you're interested to hear more about what I thought about it. I loved it. It stayed with me. It's probably one of the most difficult books I ever read in different ways, on different levels. And I really want to go back to Faulkner. I'm hoping to go back to some of his writing this month, April 2019, so I'll let you know about that. Then I read the wonderful Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton, and I absolutely loved that book. It was my first time reading it, and it's become one of my favorite books of all time. Again, I made a review of it, so go check it out. This book, Ethan Frome, sent me down a rabbit hole, an Edith Wharton's rabbit hole. So I read some of her other novels. I reread The Age of Innocence, which is perhaps her best known book, and liked it enough. I got annoyed by all this, by the rich people's narrative that is this book. But that's probably unfair. That's probably an unfair comment. It kind of annoyed me. I found it a little bit too wordy, but it's an amazing book. It's great. It's great. And I can see why it's one of her most famous book. And I can see why a lot of people love it. Definitely worth reading. I also read The House of Mirth, which I always thought was one of the best titles. Having read it, I think it's even better, a better title, because my goodness, it's such a sad story. Loved it. And then I also read Summer, which I don't think it's that well as well known as the other three. Probably because the title, it's so bland, you know? I mean, Summer, I don't know how many novels are have that title, or how many stories or whatever. So it's not a memorable title. I do not think it's a bad title, but it's not memorable. I liked it. It was perhaps the most different to the other ones that I read by her. A fairly short book, intriguing story with intriguing characters. Highly recommended, like everything else that I've read by her. I'm on a break from Edith Wharton right now, but I might go back to her writing in the future because I think she's one of the best writers I've ever read. Okay, then I read 3 fairly short books that have been very hyped up, and so I don't normally yield to hype, but in this case I did. And the books were Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, which was published very recently, I think earlier this year. And I also read Convenience Store Woman by a Japanese writer whose name I can't remember right now, but I'll put it on the screen, and I'm sorry about that. And I read The White Book by Han Kang, better known for her novel The Vegetarian, which I'm yet to read, but after reading The White Book, I really want to get to. Yeah, these were 3 very light yet haunting books in different ways. That's why I've kind of put them together here. They're very different though. But they do have some similarities other than the length. All 3 highly recommended. Perhaps my least favorite of the 3 is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. I was slightly disappointed by it, and I think it's a book that won't necessarily pass the test of time, although that's hard to say just because it's a very post-Brexit British novel, in a similar vein to some of the stuff that Ali Smith has been putting out, I think. And by the way, I'm yet to read Winter by Ali Smith, but I will try to get to it this month. Then I read a Catalan language novel called La Vigilia by a young writer called Marc Artigau. This is not a book that I wanted to read. My boyfriend came back from an overseas trip and he had a layover in Barcelona. And so he picked it up just because this novel had won a literary award there in Catalonia, so he thought it might be good. It was a readable book. I had a lot of issues with how it was written. I won't talk too much about it because, as far as I know, it's only out in the original Catalan. I'm assuming it will be translated into Spanish, at least, if it hasn't yet. But I doubt it will be translated into other languages like, English. So I won't talk too much about it. It wasn't memorable. It was very readable. I read it over a couple of days. And I'm glad I got it. It was a lovely present. I always love getting books. But yeah, that's La Vigilia, which means the vigil in English. But I don't know if it will ever be translated. And if it is, I doubt they'll use that name because I don't think it's a very good title for the book in question. Anyway, then I also read Babbitt, something totally different by Sinclair Lewis. So this is an American classic and one that had been on my TBR for a really long time. And I wanted to get to it, and I think I mentioned it in one of my previous videos briefly, probably in one of the tags. Because I thought it would deal with disappointment in capitalistic society and all of that, and I thought it would be an existential book. It's not really that. It's a good portrayal of 1920s America, and it's set during the Prohibition era, and that makes it kind of interesting, but I think it was an overlong book. It dragged. Nothing happened for the first, I think, 6 or 7 chapters. Then it picked up a bit in terms of narrative. I'm glad I've read it, mostly because now I know that I have read it and I know that I won't have to read it ever again. And that makes me happy, if that makes any sense to you. And then the final book that I read last month was Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates. And I made a review video, which is not getting as many views as I thought it would because, I thought that Joyce Carol Oates is such a popular and prolific writer, then more people would want to watch it. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it. I'm not going to talk about it here because I want you to watch my review of it and comment, and let's talk about that book in the review video. But that was the last book that I read in March. So let me know if you've read any of the books I've talked about and what you think about them, or if you want to read any of the books I've mentioned and why. And also let me know what you've been reading, what you read last month in March. I'm sorry this video is so late. Apologies, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you if you're one of my subscribers. And if you're not one of my subscribers yet, please consider subscribing because it makes me so happy when I get one subscriber. That just, you don't understand how my heart leaps with joy when that happens. So make me happy, make my little ticker happy, And anyway, thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye.